Hey, what's going on? Posido here. Today I'm going to talk about chord melodies, particularly chord melodies that are played on the bass guitar, just like you heard a few seconds ago. I'm going to show you my take on it. I'm going to talk about what you need to know before you even start writing your own chord melodies or solo bass arrangements. And then what I'm going to do is a little bit different. I'm going to break down what I did in the intro and kind of go over some of my thought processes as well as the techniques that I'm using so that you have something to use as well for writing your own solo bass arrangements. All right, so if you're into this kind of stuff, this video is for you. Let's dive in. Okay, so real quick, a chord melody is a technique where you play a chord underneath a melody. Okay, so if I have a simple melody like this, I might play something like this. Okay, now the way I like to think about it is more playing chords that support a melody. Okay, it's a little bit different in the perspective, but the reason why I think of support is I'm not thinking of actually playing a chord for every single melodic note. Okay, so if I were to play, a chord for every note, that's something that's more almost like hymnal in a sense, like what you would hear in a church where an organ player would play every single, chord for every single note. I think of it more supporting, so I might hear something more like this. And then a chord is played. Okay, so there's a little bit more space involved and a lot more focus on the melody. If you focus on, for instance, the notes that fall on beats 1 and 3 of a measure, typically those notes in the melody are going to either be a root note, a third, or a fifth of a chord. That's a lot of information there, and that almost creates a blueprint for you to start out with when you're writing your own chord melody or solo bass arrangement. Okay, so learn the melody, learn it in different keys. I think that's important too as well. The reason being is some keys will allow you to play open strings where other keys won't. And I like to write arrangements where there's a lot of open, where there's an opportunity to use open strings a lot. And I'll go over that very shortly when I'm breaking down the solo arrangement I did earlier, because I use a lot of open strings. But those open strings kind of help you kind of expand the range on your instrument. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is going to break down what I did earlier in the video where I played a chord melody or a bass solo arrangement to the tune Both Sides Now by Joni Mitchell. Okay, it's a great tune. I highly recommend you check it out. I'm going to talk a little bit about my thought process as well as kind of go over some of the techniques that I'm using so that you have something to use as well when you're trying to start out writing your own chord melodies or solo arrangements. All right. Okay, so here's the first phrase of the melody. Okay, the first technique that I did or that I'm using is where I just sustain a note of the melody and then continue on playing the rest of the melody. Okay, and it'll sound like this. Okay, so now you're hearing this sustain and you're hearing this sustain. In this particular phrase, it just happens to be a perfect fifth right here. Okay, that's a nice sound to it. The perfect fifth for me almost has kind of like a meditative type of vibe. It's very reflective. You hear a lot of upright bass players use this chord. Okay, it's perfect fifth. It's also known as a power chord. But for me, the song, when I listen to the melody and when I listen to the lyrics of this song, it's very reflective, so the perfect fifth kind of just works really well for it. Now the next part of the melody starts to ascend very quickly. Whenever I have an ascending melody, I like to explore a concept called contrary motion, where the bass note descends or goes a different direction. So I'm going to play this bass note. Okay, and that's just going down the D major scale. So when I put it together with this ascending melody, I get a little bit more movement. All right. Now, from a technique perspective, I like to also do like just kind of thumb and middle finger. Okay. Now, I'm not always playing chords where it's just they're always in perfect sync. That's not really how I hear kind of like these, chord melody arrangements. You can do that. There's nothing wrong with it, but I like the movement that's created when you just do a little bit more Just kind of thumb and middle finger pluck. Now the next part of the phrase goes like this. Now that I saw created this kind of chord. So I'm going to use that same technique I did earlier in the beginning, where I sustain some notes in the melody while the melody continues. So that kind of creates now this nice chord. And as I move on, now I'm using an open string, my open E string. Now I'm using my A string. So this is really important. When you're learning a melody, it's really important to learn the melody in different keys, particularly keys that kind of allow an open string. That's a really nice opportunity to explore, because when you have an open string, it kind of frees up your fingers to do other things. But it also allows you to expand the range of your instrument. Now that I'm sustaining a low part of my instrument, I can be somewhere else on my neck, and then kind of widen out the sonic spectrum. So, okay, and then I did a little bit of a call and response. Now that's a technique you'll hear a lot of. For instance, you'll hear that technique used a lot in blues, for instance, where the singer sings something and then the guitarist kind of plays just a small, tiny phrase that kind of responds to it. It kind of starts to make music feel like a little bit more like a conversation. Okay, so I kind of like that. So I had this phrase. Okay, and then I move on to the next part of the verse, second verse. Okay, so I use the same technique again. This time, when I started the melody, I'm harmonizing it with the root note here, so I create that power chord again. Okay, so it's just a little bit bigger and thicker than the first verse. And then what I did there was I harmonized it this time versus playing it as almost broken intervals. I played them at the same time. Okay. One thing I also like to do from a technique perspective is when I'm playing these chords at the same time, I like to vary it up a little bit. And this is subtle. This is all at the same time, and then when I get to, I kind of do like a flam. Okay, they're not actually played at the same time right there. That kind of creates a little bit of a bigger sound actually. Okay. After that, I'm going to create a little bit more contrast to just kind of move things along, and I'm going to play a fill. And I'm thinking dynamics. When I play something like a fill, I'm going to try to be a little bit louder and maybe change my articulation to be a little bit more, more clear or more straightforward. In that case, what I'm doing is a lot of like slurs in a sense. There's my open string again. Okay, might think a little bit more of a kind of like a soulful type of approach. Now, I'm going to use my open string again to change things up a little bit. This is what I'm going to do now. What I did in the intro is I'm sustaining my A string here, which I'm pedaling it is what they call it. And then I'm going to move in a different direction or create a melodic phrase to kind of lead me to the verse. Okay, so in this case I'm playing broken intervals again. Okay, so just sustaining this while this is going. So there's different ways you can play kind of contrary motion. One way is, a melodic line could be descending, whereas another melodic line could be ascending. But another way is one line could just be staying stagnant. Okay, and that's what a pedal tone is. Whereas and then the other melody just kind of travels. Okay, now I'm at the chorus. And I did the same exact thing for the chorus. I'm harmonizing it now with the root note with the D, just sustaining that. This kind of creates almost like a bagpipe type of sound. I kind of liked it, so that's why I did it. Now I'm thinking contrast. Contrast is a very powerful technique whenever you're doing anything solo, because it kind of gives your ear a rest. So I've been playing a lot of, this very thick, heavy sound. I'm going to contrast that with something that's very sparse, thin, and quiet. Okay, and then I'm going to play now a fill again, kind of jump out at you. Kind of create a little bit more drama. And there, at the end of my arrangement right there. So there's a number of techniques that I kind of went over and a little bit of my thought process. And hopefully those techniques you can use to, to explore with your own chord melodies and your own arrangements. I hope you liked this information. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, please like my video, subscribe to my channel. I'll see you next time.